So we've prayed for teachers, we've prayed for students. Everybody's ready, right? School starts. If you're in Loudoun County, it started, I think, last Thursday. School starts in Fairfax County tomorrow. And the start of the school year is kind of a big deal. How many people who are adults here are excited for school to start tomorrow? Oh, that is low. How many people are not excited for it to start? I got to tell you, I fall in the category of not excited this year. The summer was just too quick. It went by too quickly, and unfortunately, at the start of every year, I come to start counting and realizing it's less years that we have our kids at home, right? Every time school starts again, I'm like, man, here we go. But I polled some people this week, and I started thinking about memories of school starting, and how many of you remember those sort of butterflies that you get in your stomach, right, when school's about to start? Who will be in my class? Right? Will I have lunch with other people that I know? Will people be nice to me? Will I miss the bus? Right? I read this thing about a kid who missed the bus and was super anxious this week. A kid came up to me this morning and he said, I know school's going to be good, but my heart is very anxious. And that anxiety doesn't stop, right? Teachers have that anxiety too, right? I've talked to a lot of our teachers who are here this morning. They're like, yeah, they're coming. Whether we're ready for it or not, they're coming. Right? And administrators and folks who work in schools. So that anxiety is not something that just happens for kids. And it's not something that just happens with people related to school. How many of you have been in places where you're starting a new job, or you have a big presentation, or you really, really like somebody and you're going to tell them that you like them? Right? All of those feelings of anxiety take you right back to early elementary school and early middle school. And I think often the question that comes up in these moments is, will I be enough? Am I good enough? Am I smart enough? Will they like me enough? Am I important enough? Am I good looking enough? Enough. And unfortunately, this is a little bit different than when my parents were parenting, because there are these things now out there called like TikTok and Facebook and Instagram and all these things that people only put their perfect life out there on. Right? If somebody starts talking about their problems, you unfollow them, right? Because you sit and you watch people and they say, look at our great vacation and all of our beautiful pictures. What they don't show is their kids fighting. They don't show screaming at their children, and they don't show when the cooler turned upside down and all the food fell out. We have gotten ourselves to a place where I think the world says over and over again that you have to be perfect just to fit in. You got to get your stuff all together. And Caitlin, who's part of our worship team, did this beautiful song recently about this idea of perfection. And if you didn't see it, please go back on our archive and watch it. But friends, I want to tell you this morning that I think the world is selling us a lie when it says if you want to be valued, if you want to be successful, then you got to have all your stuff together. I think it's a lie, and it's a lie that we fall into over and over again. We find ourselves in this place of fear and of shame because we're not as good as the other person. We're not quite as good as the other person that we know. We're finishing up this series this morning called Prodigal Love. And in this series, we've been talking about the lavish nature of God's love. And I want to look at this idea of being perfect. Our scripture today that we're going to look at tells us the story of a guy who was hiding, who had run, who ends up becoming a big person in the story of the Bible. His name is Moses. But he had run because he was terrified. Just before the passage we're going to look at, God comes to him in a burning bush and essentially says, Moses, get your stuff together. You've got a job to do. Come back. I know that you have messed up and I know that you have struggled. But come back because the people need you. The conditions have been really hard for the people of Israel. The Hebrews have become slaves to the Egyptian leaders and things are really tough. And we get to this place today where Moses is going to respond to God's calling on him to go back and save the people. And we're looking at chapter 4 in the book of Exodus. It says, Moses answered, but what if they do not believe me or listen to me? And they say, the Lord did not appear to you. Then the Lord said to him, what's that in your hand? A staff, he replied. The Lord said, throw it on the ground. So Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. Now, I want to pause here for a second. If God ever tells me to reach out and grab a snake by the tail, that ain't happening, okay? But Moses does it, right? Reach out and grab it by the tail. So Moses reaches out. He took hold of the snake, turned it back into a staff in his hand. This, said the Lord, is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. Then the Lord said, put your hand inside your cloak. So Moses put his hand into his cloak, and when he took it out, the skin was leprous. It had become as white as snow. Now put it back into your cloak, he said. So Moses puts his hand back into his cloak, and when he takes it out, it's restored like the rest of his flesh. Then the Lord said, if they do not believe you or pay attention to the first sign, then they may believe the second. But if they do not believe these two signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on dry ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the ground. This is a weird passage, isn't it? Friends, the Bible is not boring. This is a strange passage where God says, I'm going to give you all these tools. Right? Moses doesn't come with the tools. God says, I'm going to give you all these tools. All these things that you can use, these things that you can take up. See, Moses had run away from Egypt. If you don't know the story, Moses had taken the life of one of the Egyptians. And he was so terrified that he ran. He ran away from God's call on him. He ran away from helping his people. He ends up in the deserts of Midian all alone, wondering what in the world to do. And God meets him in the midst of this burning bush. Now, if you hear all of this and you say, this is crazy, I don't want to pick up a snake, I don't want a leper's hand, I don't want to deal with bloody water, there's good news. Right? It's not just a bad story. There's good news in this story. And the good news is not just for Moses, it's for us. In this story, God says that God can do great things through imperfect people. Amen? So I want you to look at someone beside you. Say to your neighbor, you don't have to be perfect. Now, because that is Northern Virginia heresy, I want you to look at another person and say, you don't have to be perfect. Now, when you get home today, I want you to look in the mirror and say it 35 more times. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have it all together. As we look at God's invitation and the challenge that God gives to Moses, we see that it's an invitation and a challenge for each of us. We don't have to have it all together. We don't have to have a spotless past. We don't have to be perfect today. Like Moses, God chooses to use us, imperfect people, to do incredible things. So what does this look like specifically as we explore this story of Moses, as we look at the background and we look at what God does? It tells us that God is not a God that's from a far distance away, but that God is absolutely present. Now, you might not have had a burning bush moment yet. I haven't. But God is a present God with you. God does not leave Moses alone to hide in the desert. And this is the first point that I think we get out of this. It's really important. God seeks us out. God seeks you out. God is searching for you. This is the God who draws near, the God who hears our cries, hears our doubts, recognizes our fears, our uncertainties, our shame, and cares for us. It's the God who desires to deliver us from the things that control us. God meets you right there, seeks you out to find you. This is an incredible, lavish, prodigal love of God that we were talking about last week. And if you don't know what the word prodigal is, most people don't. It's a love that is given that is so much greater than anything we can understand, than anything we deserve. God's prodigal love is for you as God seeks you out. The Huffington Post ran this beautiful story that I read from Honolulu, and it's about this organization, this group called the Blue Water Mission that started this restaurant called Seed. And the restaurant is for people who have had different backgrounds and different stories in a place where no matter what their history is, no matter what they've done, they can come and work in this restaurant and they have a job. And it's a bit of a rehabilitation place for people. But specifically, this article focused on a woman named Mary Nelson. When Mary was 14 years old, her mother took her own life. They were living in New York City. And the only way that Mary could provide for her family was to go and live and work on the streets. So she worked on the streets, and at 18 years old, she moved to Hawaii thinking that could be a new life. But instantly, she started working on the street. Now, folks from Blue Water Mission have this goal of giving people dignity and connecting with them and giving them value and giving them purpose. So they met Mary. When they met her, they offered her this job at Seed. Now, she's 50 years old at this point in her story, and the interesting thing is she has never held another job other than working on the street. The first job she took when she worked in the Seed restaurant was as a dishwasher because she said she could not be out with the good people. She had to be back in the back, washing dishes, and it took her some time, a lot of hard work. But when she finally gets to start working out front, she makes this statement that's quoted in the Huffington Post. She says, "I get to be the person I was never able to be. I get to help people without someone trying to take advantage of me." In the story, as she talks about it, she said, "I make in 1 month at Seed what I made in 1 day on the street." She had condos. She had all the stuff that she wanted. But beatings and horror came with the pay that she got. It was a terrible, terrible life for her. She says, "You can't buy what I'm going through right now." But this is the part that caught me in the story. She said, "I never thought that I'd be the person I am right now. I never thought that I'd be the person that I am right now." Someone looked at her and said, "You don't have to have it all together. Your past doesn't have to be spotless for God to love you because God came seeking after you before you even knew who God was." God has been calling Mary to live a life that showed her dignity. God doesn't want her to be abused. God doesn't want her to live a life where she is not valued. So the second thing that comes up then is that God accepts us as we are, and that might be a hard thing for some people in this room. God accepts you as you are. God seeks you out as you are. God accepts you as you are. We arrive at this part of Moses' story already in progress. God has already showed up in chapter 3 in the form of a burning bush, as I told you. And even when Moses comes up with excuse after excuse, he comes up with 8 of them, by the way. 8 excuses of why he's not good enough, why he's not valuable enough, why he can't do the job that God has given him. God doesn't shut him down. God doesn't walk away. What God does is he engages Moses in a dialogue of love, a dialogue of calling, a dialogue of something greater than who Moses is, right at that moment, not because Moses isn't valuable, not because Moses isn't important, but because God can see what Moses is and who he can be. So God tells Moses to go to Pharaoh, demanding that the Israelites be released from slavery, to which Moses asks this really important question: who am I to do that? What do I have? What do I bring? Again, going through the litany of things. So Moses deals with doubt. Can you believe that? A really important person in the Bible deals with doubt. He doesn't have it all together. He doesn't know all the answers. Moses says, what if they won't believe me or listen to me? What if they say the Lord never appeared to you? And then in the end of verse 10, Moses said to the Lord, pardon your servant, Lord. I've never been eloquent, never in the past, nor since you've spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech and of tongue. Friends, as we look at this story, what we see is we see a vulnerability of Moses coming and saying, I don't have it all together. I don't have everything you need for this job to happen. I'm not perfect. I don't have all the stuff. There's a huge vulnerability in that. How often are you able to be vulnerable with people? Right? If you're a teacher on the first day, when parents come to that back to school thing, you don't tell them about your flaws. You're like, we have this all together. Even though you know you don't. But Moses has this beautiful moment where he's like, God, I can't do this. I don't have it all together. God, I don't speak well. You're calling me to speak. But I think more importantly than Moses' vulnerability, we get an authentic God who comes and says, I know you don't speak well. It's okay. I know you don't have it all together. It's all right. But I love you, and I want to use you. Friends, what if we were to model this type of dialogue in our own communities? What if even in the church we said, it's okay to doubt. It's okay to not know everything. It's okay to not have it all together. In a book by John Burke, No Perfect People Allowed, Creating a Come As You Are Culture, he says this: doubt is not only healthy, it's thoroughly biblical. In the Bible, you do find those who had absolute certainty, but those who never doubted, struggled, or wrestled with what it meant to do the will of God were not the heroes of faith. They were the Pharisees who crucified Jesus. Come on now, y'all. The people who you hear story after story about are the people like you and me who mess up, who don't have it all together, and God, the God of second chances, comes and meets them right where they are. Moses is alone in the desert, and God comes in the form of a burning bush. You may feel that you're alone in your desert right now. I don't know what your story is right now or where you are, but the good news is God's not going to leave you there in the desert. God will seek you out, accept you as you are, and work in and through you to fulfill great purposes. And all you have to do is accept the partnership. Accept the relationship. Say, I don't have it all together, but I'm in. Oh, and if you're a person here this morning who's figured it all out, if you have no spots in your past, I kind of agree with the title of that book, No Perfect People Allowed. Because we're just a bunch of people trying to figure it out. Trying to walk through this journey together. If you want to be part of a community, longing with God to accomplish more than you could ever imagine, working with God to bring real change and real transformation to the hearts and lives of people that gather in this space each week, that we intersect with in our homes, our schools, that are in our communities, the journey starts right here. Part of this idea of the tent of discipleship, step into it. Step under the tent, not saying I'm bringing my suitcase full of all the things that make it right and good, but maybe just bring yourself. You don't need a suitcase. Step under the tent and say, I want to grow. I want to connect. It's as easy as saying, here I am, Lord. I don't have it all figured out, but use me in whatever way. You know, it's funny. As I read that story of Mary in the Huffington Post, I actually connected a lot with her. Not because I've been through the trials or the challenges, the difficulties she's been through. I connected a lot with her because I live a lot of my life going, wow, I am not as good as all those other pastors. I am not as good as all those people who have it all together. I am not the greatest parent, shockingly. So I connected with her. And then I made a decision as I was preaching, as I was thinking through this week. Today I'm going to choose to believe that God makes me good enough. And today I want to invite you to choose to believe that God makes you good enough. I sure hope that you do.